Hi, and welcome back to another week. This is COMM1160, and this is the video for week 11. This week, we're going to be taking a bit of a break from the essay. So you have completed or you're working on completing your rough draft at the point that you're watching this. We're going to take a break and we're going to focus on workplace writing this week so that we can give you some extra time next week when we're going to begin working on the essay final draft. So try to put your essay out of your head for now. We're on to something new. There will be an assignment due that's based on this week's material, and the due date for that is going to be August the 8th by midnight. So a fair bit of time to work on this week's assignment. We're going to talk about workplace writing in this particular unit. And I always like to start this unit by talking about why we even focus on it. So it seems maybe a little bit odd that in a nursing program, we're actually doing a unit on business writing. The reason we do it is because healthcare workers are now expected to be able to handle basic business writing as part of their job. Years and years ago, quite a while ago now, hospitals and doctors' offices and healthcare institutions used to hire people that simply just took care of the business writing end of the job. So they had writers, or they had administrative assistants who would do all of the writing. And the nursing staff and the PSWs and everything just did the clinical stuff. Then recessions happened. And like every industry, healthcare decided to cut back. What they ended up doing was eliminating those positions where people were doing the writing, and they just kind of added it on to the workload of nurses and PSWs and people that work in healthcare. So these days now, everyone is expected to have some basic business writing knowledge to be able to handle some of the business of healthcare. If you talk to people who have worked in nursing that are retired, they may tell you that they never did any writing on the job. And that's completely possible, right? Because like I said, in the old days, there were people who did that just as their profession. But if you talk to new grads that are working out in the healthcare industry right now, they will tell you that they have had to do some basic business writing. Business issues emerge that are separate from hands-on clinical care. So your day-to-day as a nurse is going to be taking care of people in a clinical setting, but you're still working in a business. You're still working in an organization, and business communication is going to come up, whether that's communication between individuals that work together, or whether we're talking about communication with patients or communication with outside organizations and companies. So again, that's why we focus on the business writing. The other thing is that we're thinking about the future. So the higher you rank, the more business writing you will complete. So if you end up in a supervisory role, you're going to be doing more business writing. If you end up working as a manager, in some area of healthcare, who knows where everybody's going to end up, 5-10 years from now. But if you move up the ladder, you're going to be doing more and more business writing, and more handling of the business. So we want to get you ready for that part as well. When we talk about business writing, there's two main forms of business writing: the letter, the business letter, and the business memo. And there's a difference between the two. Letters go from an organization to someone outside. So if you're working for a company or an organization and you're writing to a patient, or you're writing to another company or organization, you're going to be using letter format. So let's give two examples of that. Let's say you're writing to a patient to let them know that they have a follow-up appointment with a specialist. You'd use a letter in that situation. Or you're working as a nurse and you're asked to order some supplies from a company. Maybe you're asked to order some masks and gloves. You write to that company, you'd use letter format. Memos stay within an organization. So if you're writing to somebody that works for the same employer that you're at, you're going to use memo format. An example of that would be if I was working as a PSW and you were working as an RPN, but we were both working at the same long-term care facility. If I had to write to you, I would use memo format. Email can straddle both forms. Okay, so if you're doing everything electronically, it's still going to be the same format. Letters take a separate format, memos take a separate format. Email is just the vehicle by which you would send it. Okay, so email can go either way. Healthcare, though, has been slow to move to electronic communication. And at a lot of organizations, you'll find that paper letters and paper memos are still frequently used. They've been a little bit slower, okay, than other types of businesses or industries to move to electronic information. I think that's probably because of privacy concerns. But you'll find like a lot of people say, wow, I walked into a doctor's office and it was like 20 years ago, right? We weren't using email at all. We were just using letters. Completely normal for the healthcare industry. So we're going to focus on how you actually set up for paper format of letters and memos so that you know how to do it. Again, knowing if you're using email, the only difference is that you're actually sending it by email as opposed to printing it out on paper and popping it into the mail or into the inter-office mail. So again, key points to remember: the letter goes from you to someone outside your organization. The memo goes from you to somebody inside your organization. We should take a look at each format, and that's what I want to spend the next few minutes doing. There are specific rules about formatting a letter. The good news is the rules are not as complicated as APA, so it is a little bit easier in terms of formatting. Also, letters are usually printed on what they call letterhead. Just in case you're unfamiliar with that term, letterhead is pre-printed paper that usually has some type of a graphic, and it has the organization's name and address on it. I have put a template of a letter for you up in Blackboard, and I'm going to just open that now so that we can take a look at it. And we're on video, so of course I pull up the wrong file. Here are my business writing templates. I will give these to you on Blackboard. And I have set up the template for a letter. We're going to go over the different parts of the letter here in a minute. But this is what I mean by letterhead. I just designed my own letterhead, so it's pretty basic looking. Okay, I'm not a graphic designer. It doesn't look too pretty, but it has all of the main elements. So the name of the organization, the street address, and the telephone number. Okay, and even if you just take a look at the mail that you get at home, right, you'll see different styles of letterhead that are used. For our assignment, I'm going to be asking you, if required, to create your own letterhead. So you can be as creative as you like, okay, when you're doing this, or as basic as you like. Like I said, I'm no artist, so what I put up here is pretty basic. This is actually the content of the letter. Okay, so if you see here, I have an actual business letter that follows all the business writing rules laid out for you here. Let's go over the different parts. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I have the name of the person and the address of the person that I am writing to. I put in the person's first and last name. So I've used Ariana Grande. Okay, it's my example here. I put in her first and last name. Notice I didn't use a title. So I didn't put in Mr., Ms., Mrs., any of that. Modern business writing says that you leave that out. Okay, so again, older folks that went through training earlier in life may have been taught to include that title. But these days, because we can't assume gender and we can't from a name identify somebody's gender, we have decided to actually leave that out. So now we simply put first name and last name. If we're writing to them at work, we include the name of their employer. We then have the street address, and then the city, followed by a comma, and then a space, and the province. Every province in Canada has a 2-letter code. Ontario is capital O-N. Okay? If you need to write to another province, you can easily look it up online, the different abbreviations, or if you need to write to somebody in the States, the 2-letter abbreviation for the States, you can easily look up. If you're writing internationally, do some web searching so you can see how to format the address for outside of the country. But most of the writing, I imagine you're going to be doing is probably within the province. So it would take this particular format. And then I have the postal code. Okay. Notice that all of this is lined up right to the side on the left, and I have no spaces in between. I then skip and put in a blank line, and then my next line is the date. For the date, I always express it as full month, numerical date, comma, followed by the year. Okay, I don't want to use like 01-02-21 because there's no standard for that. People get confused. They don't know which is the day and which is the month. So always spell out the month, then the numerical date, then the year. Then I skip another line. And then I have what's called in business writing terms, the salutation, which is just a fancy way of saying, dear so-and-so. Okay. You'll notice here, okay, that I'm repeating first name and last name. Dear Annie Ariana Grande. Okay. Again, do not need to include a title there. It's first name, last name. And then I have something unusual. I have a colon. If you're writing a card to somebody or something personal, right, where you're writing to a friend, you use a comma, but in business writing, you always use a colon. Then I skip another line and I move into the body of my letter. Okay, so this junk that I put in here represents something that I've written to someone. You can see this letter is 2 paragraphs. The paragraphs are set out by skipping a line in between. Notice as well, unlike APA, there is no indentation. So I simply do paragraph 1, skip a line, paragraph 2, skip a line, paragraph 3, okay, and so on and so forth. And you'll also notice that my paragraphs are pretty short. That's perfectly okay in business writing, because business writing is not essay writing. It's perfectly acceptable to have a paragraph with 1 or 2 sentences within it, depending on the situation. Once I'm done the content of my letter, I then skip another line and I provide a complimentary close. And the complimentary close in business situations is nearly always the word sincerely, followed by a comma. Then I want to leave at least 4 lines of space here. And then I'm going to type my first and my last name. And then right underneath, I'm going to put in my job title, okay, which is registered practical nurse, or could be nursing supervisor or nursing manager, or whatever your job title is. The reason I've left out 4 lines here is because I want to give myself room to sign this letter in pen. If I have a really large signature, I can put in more than 4 lines. Okay, minimum is 4. It really depends on how big your signature is. Some people have huge signatures. Some people have tiny little signatures. At least 4 lines there, but give yourself more room if you know that you use more room. Okay, and that's it, right? Those are the only rules to follow in terms of a letter. So it looks pretty plain and pretty businesslike. It uses a very plain font. I've used Calibri 12 here. You can use whatever font you like, but just pick one that looks businesslike. So again, you don't want to pick, like if I go here, like this Algerian or whatever would be a little too fancy. Okay, but something plain is perfectly fine for business writing. Also, the organization that you go into may have a preferred font. So they may tell you, oh, all of our stuff is done in Arial, or all of our stuff is done in whatever. So you just follow whatever your organization wants. But when you're doing the assignment, you can use whatever font you like. Just pick something sort of plain and professional looking. So that's the actual setup for a letter. Let's go and talk about the memo. I'm going to just switch back to our PowerPoint. And when we're talking about memos, memos also have specific rules about formatting. Usually, most organizations have some sort of a template for memos. So they'll have a file pre-set up for you on the computer that actually lists out the part of the memo, and you just go in and sort of fill in the blanks, right? Fill in the spots that require some information. I have also put up a template for you on Blackboard so that you can actually see how a memo is set up. And I'm going to switch into this file now and show you what a memo looks like. So remember again that memos go within an organization, so from one employee to another. Memos always start with the word memorandum or the short form memo up at the top. That's usually centered and in bold. And then you have the routing information. And the routing information is going to look really familiar because that's what email was based off, the paper memo. You have a to section, a from section, a date section, and a subject section. Notice that these are all separated out by a skipped line, and that we have what's called internal margins in here. So to, from, date, and subject are all lined up on one side, and then the entries for all of these things are all lined up with an internal margin. You do that just by hitting tab, okay, to make sure stuff is lined up. To, you always put the person's first and last name, followed by a comma, and then their job title. From would be your first and last name, followed by a comma, and then your job title. Even if you know the person for 20 years, you still need to include their first and their last name, followed by their job title. You still need to include your first and last name, followed by your job title. It's just a convention or a rule. It also is important because if other people take a look at this document for some reason, they need to be able to establish who it was sent from and who received it. Okay, so again, even if the person is your best friend and you've known them forever, first and last name and job title. Then you have your date, and again, just like the letter, you're putting in the month, the numerical date followed by a comma and then the year. And then you have your subject line. Okay? Your subject line is a really important part of your memo, and it's written in what they call telegraphic style. All that means is that you're writing not in a full sentence, but sort of giving your memo a title, okay, not in a sentence. It is really important when you're writing memos that you include a clear subject line. When I open up my email every morning, I take a look at the subject lines, okay, of what people have written to me. And it's amazing. People oftentimes don't think about their subject lines, and they'll just put hi as the subject. Okay, then I'll open up the email, and it's not just somebody saying hi. It's somebody asking me to do something or approve something or whatever, right? I haven't had any warning by looking at the subject line about what the content of the email is. As a courtesy to the reader, when you're writing a subject line, you want to be specific there because you want to give the person who's going to receive the message an opportunity, one, to prioritize what memo they're going to read first, okay, what memo they're going to read second. But second of all, this stuff may end up being filed later. And so a person who's filing the information needs to be able to quickly know what this memo is about so that they can put it in the right place. So a specific subject line, very important. Notice there's no period afterwards or anything. It's simply a title. Then I have a thick black line here, and this just separates out the routing information from the actual message that the memo contains. Here is the actual message of the memo, and you'll see this is just a little 2-paragraph memo that someone has written. Another thing you'll notice is that with a memo, there's no dear so-and-so and there's no sincerely so-and-so. It's just the actual message. Because when you're working for the same employer, you don't need to waste time with all the nicey nice stuff that you do when you're sending messages outside your organization. You normally get right down to business. So here's my paragraph 1. And just like the letter, to show that I'm moving to a second paragraph, I skip a line. Here's my paragraph 2. I've left the rest of the page blank. Okay. Memos typically are a page or less, so you normally do not go over a page in a memo. If it goes over a page, you probably should be writing what they call a report instead of a memo. Memos are for sort of quick and easy information, okay, that you need to share from one individual to another. That covers the formatting for letters and memos. In our next video, we're going to talk about actual writing strategies and how to construct really effective letters and memos based on the situation that you're in. I'll talk to you in our next video.